I had a choice to that, got it or leaving the website. So I did click, got it. Okay. If you got a pencil, would or a pen and pencil or paper, encourage you to write down this quote that I will quote a number of times. This is a quote from Karl Rahner, a Jesuit German theologian. The incarnation is the ineffable outrageousness. Okay. So the incarnation is the ineffable, unspeakable, the ineffable outrageousness of the absolute Godhead in person, falling stark naked into our narrow creaturehood. Okay. Ineffable means unspeakable, but I'm going to speak about it for a half hour or so. Do folks have that down? Again, I'll repeat it. The incarnation is the ineffable outrageousness of the absolute Godhead in person, falling stark naked into our narrow creaturehood. Another way of putting it is the infinite becomes infant. How wonderful that God made it easy, a little easier to believe in the ineffable by having a cute baby wrapped in swaddling clothes. We all fall in love with babies wrapped in swaddling clothes. And so that got us in a good mood. It's easy to fall in love with such a manifestation of God. Can you believe in a God when those swaddling clothes turn to dirty diapers? How human will you allow God to be? How human will you allow yourself to be? It's all part of the package, as it were. We hear about at least 5 million refugees leaving the Ukraine. We read about thousands and thousands of refugees on the borders of our own country seeking asylum. Once upon a time, there was a little family, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. They were fleeing for their lives to a foreign country. How human will you allow God to be? There was no room in the inn. There was no room in God's country. So this is an ineffable, unspeakable, outrageous, this entry of God into humanity. Eventually, the Holy Family came back into Israel, and we don't know much about that, except when the baby became 12 years old, they took him to Jerusalem. I'm not sure of this part, but maybe it was for his bar mitzvah, 12 years old. And he had to appear before the rabbi to make sure he knew his catechism. And we know the rest of the story, how the Holy Family left, or at least Mary and Joseph left. And I think some explanation of that is that men and women traveled together, but the men traveled in one caravan and the women traveled in another caravan. And that perhaps Jesus, when he was 12, before he was bar mitzvah, traveled with the women. And then after he met with the temple people, he traveled. The expectation was that he would travel with the men. And when Mary and Joseph met at night, when the two caravans met, they both were glad to see each other. And they both gasped, "I thought he was with you. I thought he was with you." That's how things happen in even holy families. And so they had to go all the way back another day's journey to Jerusalem. And then when they got there, there was this dialogue here. Not finding him, they returned to Jerusalem in search of him. On the third day, they came upon him in the temple, sitting in the midst of teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. All who heard were amazed at his intelligence and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, Son, why have you done this to us? See that your father and I have been searching for you in sorrow. He said to them, Why did you search for me? Did you not know I had to be in my father's house? But they did not grasp what he said. He went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother, meanwhile, kept all these things in memory. Jesus, for his part, progressed steadily in wisdom and age and grace before God and men. 12 is on the brink of teenage, and part of growing up is a tough time for teenagers and tough time for parents. Whose fault was it that there was this breakdown in communication? Was it the fault of Jesus, the Son of God? Was it the fault of the Immaculate Mary, Mother without sin? Was it the fault of Joseph, a just man? Who was at fault? Or is it just one of those things that happens in the best of families, in the holiest of families? Why does there have to be sin associated with it? Or is it just a breakdown in communication? Whose fault is it? Does always someone have to be fault, or is it just part of being human? I think we spend too much time on the 3 years that Jesus was on the road, teaching and preaching and healing. I think we spend too much time on the 3 hours on the cross and not enough time on the 30 years of nothing. We don't know anything that happened during those 30 years, except he got lost in the temple. Why? Because he lived life the way we live it. Okay. He wanted to show how blessed and good being human was. He wanted to show us the dignity of family, the dignity of work, the dignity of the ordinary. And we missed the point. I so love humanity that I will become part of it. I will become one. There are some theologians who think that the sin of the angels was that they couldn't worship a God that would become less than they. You're out of your mind, God. Why would you become someone less than me, an angel? I'm an archangel. You must be out of your mind. But it was not out of the heart of God. So that's what we need to pay attention to. God wanting to be one of us. There are some also who look at the quote the original sin, that they wanted to be like God. No, I think the original sin was they weren't pleased enough or happy enough to be who they were. And God had to say, you're so good, I want to be one of you. I will send my son to you. Because God said when God created us, we were very good, and we didn't believe it. And we wanted to go our way. So into our narrow creaturehood, as a kid, a Catholic kid, we learned the Hail Mary, and we go a mile a minute with a Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou among women, blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Thy womb, Jesus. Thy womb, Jesus. And as a kid, we don't even know what a womb is. It's the narrow creaturehood, the birth canal, that will deliver a baby into the world, a womb. Okay, that's the narrow creaturehood that we all enter life through. There should be a big comma after blessed is the fruit of thy womb, quote, comma, Jesus. Maybe it's just as well, because it'd be even harder to believe that this really is God. And so the story goes on. Well, there's the story told in Matthew and Luke about the the Annunciation, the Visitation, the Nativity, the presentation of Jesus, the finding of Jesus in the temple. And then there's all the information in Luke's Gospel about the infancy. I lost my screen here.
We still see you.
We can still see you, Vinny.
You can see me, okay, and you can hear me. Okay, great. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was in God's presence, and the Word was God. He was present to God in the beginning. Through him, all things came into being, and apart from him, nothing came to be. Whoever came to be in him found life, life for the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, a darkness that did not overcome it. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Again, Jesus, for his part, progressed steadily in wisdom and age and grace before God and men. So he had 30 years doing stuff we do in our day in and day out. And then he finally went public, got baptized in the Jordan. And God said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." And then after having 30 years of figuring out what he was going to do with his life, he needed 40 more days to go into the desert and make a retreat. You would think he would have figured that out beforehand, but he needed a sabbatical. And while he was there, he says he was hungry. Well, that's understandable. And we call those, he had some temptations. I would say he could even have had hallucinations being so hungry. And maybe these, some of the graphic descriptions about going up on a temple parapet, having the devil show him the world's kingdoms. Oh, that'd be a good way to be a Messiah. And so he had these recommendations from his mind or from the devil about stones into bread, pleasure, getting up on the top of the temple and jumping off and have angels rescue him. He could be a celebrity. or go and see all the kingdoms of the world and say, I'll be in charge. Wow, that'd be great. Power, power, pleasure, prestige, power. Wow, those are good ideas, recommendations. There never was a Messiah before. I could go that route. So you had to say, no, 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 that's not the Messiah I want to be. I want to be ordinary, human, and just love people because they're lovable. And I know what it means to love and to be loved. And I want that for everyone. He grew in wisdom and age and grace. He grew in obedience, and the word obedience means to listen. And in the neighborhood, there was a wedding, and he was invited, of course, together with Mary. And by that time, he had some friends who liked what he had to say, and they got invited too. And Mary Ever noticed that there was the wine was running low, and she brought that to his attention, and he said, it's not my time, it's none of my business. And that was kind of a put down to Mary, but she didn't let that stop her. She told the stewards to do whatever he says, which was, he must have overheard that, that he had to listen again to what his mother said, to what a woman said. And so the first miracle that he did was at the prompting of his mother, that he was obedient to her, at the prompting of a woman, got him doing a miracle for such a wonderful thing as a marriage. So that's how he grew in wisdom and obedience. And I'll jump ahead and how he started preaching all over the place. And on one occasion, it was out of the place. He was not in Israel. He was in Tyre and Sidon. And a Canaanite woman came up and begged for healing for her daughter. And he said, no, I can't do that. I'm just here for the Jews. I'm not here for the non-Jews. And she said, and then there was a terrible reference that I guess at that time, the Canaanites were considered somewhat like the animals, the dog. And if they had spoken English, you'll expect a pun along this way. She was Canaanite, so that's why they were considered canine. And Jesus said, we have no dealings with canine people. And dogs we don't feed dogs. And she said, dogs eat from the crumbs that table. And she engaged Jesus, even though he kept putting her down. And finally, he had to acknowledge her faith. And just as Mary said, or just as the interaction with Mary was, it's time, Jesus, it's time. This woman pressed him and said, it's time to expand your vision and incorporate everyone. And so by the woman's persistence, he enlarged his vision of what he was supposed to do, what he and his Messiah should do. And while I have my feminist lenses on, we'll continue in that vein and bounce around this Messiah the way he was in the world. On another occasion, he was at dinner with Pharisees, and they welcomed him, but they didn't give him the ordinary courtesies of having his feet washed by a servant like the others were. And a quote sinful woman from the village came in and came up, dared to break into the men's club and kneel at the feet of Jesus and weep there, asking for love and compassion and understanding and forgiveness. And she washed his feet with her tears and wiped them dry with her hair. And Jesus was criticized for that. Don't you know who this is and what you're doing? And he acknowledged that this particular woman, yes, she has sinned much, but she has loved more. Her sins are forgiven. And he remembered how wonderful it was from that incident, of how much he was touched by her washing his feet with her tears. And so on another occasion, when he knew trouble was around the corner, that he might die, he started to wash the feet of his disciples. And they said, no, Peter especially said, no, don't be doing, don't, that's something crazy. Don't you be doing that. Where did you get that idea? And he said, well, there was this woman who washed my feet. There was another woman who anointed my feet with oil. And I remember my mother, Mary, how she always so lovingly washed my feet. And I know what that meant. And I appreciated that. So that's why I'm washing your feet, because women did it out of love. And that's why I want to do it out of love for you. And I want to do it out of love for all 12 of you, even though I know one of you may betray me. But I love you. I love you all. And sure enough, that one left early and then went to the authorities and rounded up a posse, and they came and you kissed me on the cheek saying, Rabbi, and you were upset, but you didn't. You just said, do you betray me with a kiss? And maybe you, Jesus, thought, why didn't I pray more when I chose the 12? Why did I choose Judas? I must have made a mistake. I should have prayed another day. That's what we're supposed to do when we have a big decision, to pray about it. Decision was good. It's Judas that didn't live up to his part. But maybe, maybe I should have spent more time with him rather than so much time with Peter, James, and John. But when I chose him in freedom and in love. But then along the way, he started to change. And maybe he just wants to keep me from acting crazy, like wasting a jar of perfume on my feet. Maybe he just wants me to get arrested, thrown into jail overnight, and that'll wake me up. But I love him still. So let's go back to some of those times with Jesus, with his disciples. And they really liked him and were proud of him and proud of themselves for being his disciples. But they were slow learners. And so Jesus, a couple of times, he said, oh, you of little faith, what's wrong with you? Why do you do not have faith? How long have I been with you and you still don't understand? Where are the other 9? Why is only one, a Samaritan, come back to thank me? How do I continue on if you're not listening or you're not changing? Would you also go away? Jesus, thank you for being so honest and humble, as it were, to express your frustration and your hurt. And in the temple, I jump around, Jesus, because there's so much you have to teach us. And So I'll jump towards the end of your life. You sat on the hillside of Jerusalem and you wept. You cried. You just didn't have a few crocodile tears. It says you wept. Jesus wept. You wept. The guy that had it all together. And you used a very feminine expression. As a mother hen would gather her chicks under her wings, so would I gather you, and you wouldn't be gathered. Here I am, after 3 years on the road, and people are gathering under my wing. I seem to have failed. I know there's going to be a church in my honor, many churches in my honor. And I hope there's one honoring that I wept. And sure enough, there is one called Dominus Flavit, the Lord wept. And you wept when in the garden you thought, you prayed and you struggled to accept what was going to be happening. You wept even though you were praying that you didn't want to go through this. And then you realize I have to go through this to be true to myself. I'm not choosing the cross, I'm choosing my own truth. And that's hard. And I'll keep praying. And I asked my 3 best friends, Peter, James, and John, to be here with me in my hour of need and sorrow. And they're asleep. And here I'm going through my agony. Couldn't you watch an hour with me? You said to them. They let you down. What are best friends for? Just to be when things are rosy and everyone's clapping. Like the time you raised the daughter of Jairus, you were there. You guys were there. You guys were there when I was transfigured together with Moses and Elias. You saw me in my majesty. You saw me in my power. You're asleep while I'm suffering. Peter, you had just said an hour before the 3rd glass of wine, I'm ready to die for you, with you. And now you're asleep. Jesus, you were upset that they were asleep. Well, you were asleep when they were out on the boat and a storm came up and you fell asleep and you didn't even wake up when the boat began to rock. You got tired too. And that whole scene about at Jacob's well, when you met the Samaritan woman, you were fatigued, you were tired out from the journey in the noonday sun. And you said to the other guys, go ahead and get some food for our lunch. I'll rest here. You were confident enough or tired enough to say, I need to rest. So why were you upset with Peter and James and John when they rested, having drunk too much? Jesus, you came to teach us how to be human, how to need affirmation, how to need relationship. So thank you for that. Thank you for choosing your truth, even when others weren't there to support you. Just one disciple, John, among 3 or 4 women there when you were on the cross. How did you keep going? Keep believing in yourself, believing in your Father's love. Just humanly speaking, if I had been hanging on that cross and some pipsqueak from the crowd said, you cured other people, come down, why don't you come down from this cross and save yourself? I think I would have come down and choked the pipsqueak who didn't even honor me in the ultimate sign of love. Greater love than this no one has than to lay down his life for others. You taught us to be human and to accept the fact that you wouldn't be always understood or followed. Even your family sometimes had problems with your behavior. Once they thought you were literally out of your mind, and they came to rescue you, or they came to have an intervention, as we say now, when someone is acting erratically. So this is the example you wanted to give to us about what it means to be human. What it means to be in the image and the likeness of God. That's what you came to show us. How to be in the truth of who we are, how we are to love one another and to be loved by one another. And if that's not happening, we speak up. Jesus, you at the beginning of your mission, you gave what we call the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes. And you said, don't be angry and don't call someone a fool. Okay, well, you, sweet Jesus, telling us don't call anyone a fool because that makes you guilty of anger or even murder, because that can lead to worse things. Later, you said these words. I can't believe you said them. When the scribes and the Pharisees, when the religious authorities were laying heavy burdens on people, and you said, when you do that, you don't even lift your finger to lift the burden from the people. My mother used to say, "You kids, you don't lift a finger to help me," and I thought that was an Irish proverb or from Shakespeare, but it was from you. You won't lift a finger to help people. And so you really got fed up the way the scribes and the Pharisees, the authorities were not taking care of the people or misleading them. And you said some real strong words. I hesitate to say them because to associate them with you. But you who said, "Come to me because I am meek and humble of heart," you, Jesus, said to the scribes and Pharisees, you you frauds, you hypocrites, you whited sepulchres, you brood of vipers. Jesus, you said that to authorities. And yet here we are 2,000 years saying you were without sin. We're not supposed to get angry, people say. Well, wow, you certainly got angry and frustrated. And then that scene in the temple where you just didn't say, get out of here, you guys. You upset the tables of the money changers. They were trying to their duty because they knew this law that you had to exchange foreign coins for Jewish coins if it's going to be a good sacrifice. They were trying to help the people, and you got fed up and you upset the tables, the marketplace, as it were. So, Jesus, these are some random running thoughts that I think of. I feel for you, the poor guy. I remember when I say poor guy, that reminds me when my mother died, and there were 7 of us kids, ranging from 4 to 16. And my father was down in the basement of the house he was superintendent of, stoking the fire for the night. And he sent me and my brother Bob up to get supper for ourselves. And our aunt or his sister were taking care of us after my mother died. And she said, where's your father? And I said, he's downstairs. Well, go get him. He shouldn't be down there by himself. And he needs his supper. And I went down and he was just sitting there weeping, crying. And my response within me was, the poor guy, poor guy. And I think of that with Jesus, the poor guy, weeping over Jerusalem. Poor guy. And I think of that now, poor God. How does God put up with us? How does God continue to love us unconditionally, all of us? Not just we good people. That's not so hard for God to love us good people. But this God that we worship loves everyone, enemies, perpetrators, friends, lovers, everyone. Poor God, how do you manage that? Jesus, how did you manage that when you got nailed to the cross? And you said, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Well, sometimes they do know what they do. And we're supposed to forgive them also. You did. And you were crazy enough, loved us enough to come back after all that we did to you. And you didn't say, you guys let me down. You said peace. That was the first words you spoke after your human adventure had been glorified. So I pause now to dry my own tears and to say I need to take a break and talk to some more afterwards, and maybe those who have been listening will have other things they can add to their gratitude and ineffableness and outrageous your love story is. So we'll talk again soon. Amen. Thank you, everybody, for your powerful and beautiful responses to Philippians 2. I hope you continue to reflect on that powerful passage from Paul to the Philippians. After all that, well, powerful stuff, let me tell you a story, and some of you may have heard this before. When I was a Paulist novice at age 20 to 21, we all had house jobs, and some of us had jobs outside the house. And probably because I was from New York City, the novice director made me in charge of the chickens. And every day I dutifully took care of the chickens and broke the ice on the water pail in the morning and gathered eggs up in the afternoon and made sure that there was enough chicken feed for everyone. And I got to know them and care for them and love them, as it were. And one day, one of the chickens had a saw on its back. And I said, oh, that doesn't look good. And the next day I came and the other chickens were picking at it. And I thought, oh, that's really awful. The poor chicken is being picked to death, as it were. And then in my first fervor of a novice, ready to do everything and anything by way of sacrifice, I thought to myself, oh, maybe if I became a chicken, I could teach them how to take care of each other and be nice to each other. And I was afraid to tell the novice master that because he might think I've flipped my lid and would be doing something, even thinking of such a crazy thing. Such an ineffable, outrageous thing to think that I would do something like that. Well, that's not so outrageous compared to what Jesus did. God Almighty did the ineffable, outrageous thing of emptying his absolute Godhead and in person falling stark naked into the narrow creaturehood of a child. That's how outrageous that is when you compare it to what I was thinking. And I would have been laughed, ridiculed, because it was so outrageous. And maybe someday I may be compelled, as it were, to trade my life for the life of someone or something that other people think you're crazy. That Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, was crazy. We have the common phrase, she's so in love, she's really crazy about him, or he's really crazy about her. Would do anything for him, do anything for her. God would do anything for me. God would do anything for you. some other feelings and thoughts about the humanity of Jesus. There's that beautiful story of Jesus having 3 friends, close friends, that he would spend time with: Mary and Martha and Lazarus. He wept, not just crocodile tears, over the death of his friend Lazarus. And people commented to see how he loved him. So there's Jesus again, weeping. And then on another occasion, he was visiting them, and some of the local rabbis and leaders came over to the house of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. They heard that the teacher, the master, was there, and Mary sat at the feet of Jesus. And that was a no-no, that a woman would be taught by a rabbi or be with other rabbis. And Jesus praised her, that she listened to him, that she heard him out, and that the people listening, the other people listening, weren't trying to trip him up, have him catch him in certain things. And how Jesus really must have felt wonderful. Finally, someone is listening to me, hearing me out, letting me express myself before criticizing me or short-circuiting me or piggybacking on what some said. How wonderful it is to listen. And that's what this human being that we call Jesus Christ praised the woman Mary. And that's why we say thanks for listening. That's why some people hopefully say to you, you're a good listener. The Son of God needed a good listener because others weren't listening to him. They were trying to trip him up or find fault with him. It's all about relationship. There were some families had little children with them, and they wanted to go see Jesus and have Jesus bless them or hold them, embrace them. But the apostles shooed them away, in effect saying, don't disturb the master. The master's too busy. And when Jesus heard about it, he became indignant. Have you ever thought of Jesus being indignant? Or do you just think of him as a cool customer floating through the world with clean feet and nice white robes? When I was telling someone about this, what happened, I can picture him with his hands on his hips and saying to the apostles, what the hell are you thinking? Keeping the children from me. What's going on in your head? You are out of your mind. You don't know, you're middle management. You don't know what the boss really, by this time you should know what the boss thinks and feels and what his priorities are. But you, middle management, think you know what's best for the boss. Jesus had to not only be human, he had to negotiate the human condition in the world. How do people get along? Why they don't get along? That's tough to negotiate that human condition. To go back to those 3 disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus said to them, "Why are you sleeping? I need you. You're supposed to be my good friends." Well, I'll be a good friend to you. I'll tell you you disappointed me. That's what friends are supposed to do. Maturity is to let people know that they disappoint you. It's not you feeling sorry for yourself. It's speaking the truth. And that's so Jesus didn't tiptoe away when he saw them asleep and say, "Oh, I'll go back to my Father and pray some more because that's all I can count on." Jesus was counting on those 3 guys and they let him down. And he let them know that they let him down. That's what maturity is. Speaking to your best friends when they disappoint you. That's another lesson we can learn from Jesus as he negotiated the human condition. Just one more thing, and this is kind of a fantasy. When Jesus came back home to Capernaum, Nazareth, he was labeled as the carpenter's son. And where did he get all this fancy Yale, Harvard language? And if you can picture the carpenter's son and the mother, can you think of Mary watching Joseph teach Jesus how to nail wood together to make something, and how she delighted to see the 2 men in her life working together, and how she liked the sound of the wood and the nails. And maybe if we can further fantasize that when Jesus was first learning how to do it, he may have hit his thumb by mistake and started to cry. And like a little boy often does, goes running to mommy, that it hurts. And mommy says, "Where does it hurt?" And he says, "Where it is." And mommy saying, "Let me kiss your boo-boo where it hurts and make it better, or bandage it." Because that's part of the human condition of a little boy growing up in a carpenter's family, and the give and take of it all. So that was a beautiful scene to think of. Well, 3 years later or 20 years later, the sound of the hammer hitting nails in wood comes again when Jesus is nailed to the wood of the cross, and how that brought back lovely memories of nails being nailed to wood. And this time there are hands on the wood being nailed and feet on the wood being nailed. And was it more pain or was it more support that Jesus felt when he saw his mother at the foot of the cross? Did that help him, or did it lead to more suffering to see his own mother there, having to see her son as an executed criminal? That's what his humanity meant to his mother and to himself. So that psychological relationship, I'm not making it up. I am making it up, but I'm probably underestimating that whole dynamic of a little boy Jesus learning how to nail wood together, and his mother learning or laughing and proud of his son, her son. And now all of a sudden, the same process is happening to his son, to her son. And she may say to herself, my flesh and blood is being nailed. My flesh and blood is being nailed to that cross. And how did Mary feel? How did Jesus feel? The flesh, the Word was made flesh, the flesh of Mary. And now the flesh of Mary is being nailed to a cross. And Jesus has to see it and feel it. And let me end this way. The rest of the story. There's nothing in the gospel that says what's the first time mother and son met after the crucifixion. We don't know how they greeted each other. You can imagine that reunion. And I hope, and I don't mean this flippantly, I hope Jesus says, thanks for raising, to his mother, thanks for raising me the first time. In being a human being. Amen.